It's a massive offseason for the San Francisco 49ers in 2025. How much pressure is Kyle Shanahan under to win immediately this season following numerous massive checks that ownership has been writing for big-time players, and Brock Purdy's, the biggest of all, still to come? All that and more on today's Locked On 49ers.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker at BD Peacock at Crocky209. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Love our everydayers. If you're cruising through on YouTube, hit that thumbs up if you're already subscribed, just to let us know you stopped by. Drop a comment as well. Any questions for our Q&A this week, as well as we get ready for the NFL scouting combine here. We love hearing from you wherever it is, on social or on the YouTube comments. And if you're new to the program, welcome. Hang out with us every day as we break down the 49ers offseason, get ready for the 2025 regular season, draft, free agency, trades, all of it. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the audio version of this podcast. All right, let's talk about pressure. Interesting offseason here as teams get ready and everyone descends on Indianapolis at this time of year. And there were reports that Kyle Shanahan, because of how important this offseason was to the 49ers, there were reports that Kyle Shanahan was going to go to the combine, even though he hadn't in recent years. Turns out Kyle Shanahan is not going to go to the combine after all, Croc. But there's a few stories about how the 49ers feel and maybe how ownership might feel about some of the big contracts they've been doing recently. And obviously the biggest one of all is going to be Brock Purdy and his huge contract that is coming. So whatever the 49ers do with their plans in trade, in free agency, in signings, in the draft, whatever they do, it's going to set how this sort of on the fly transitional retooling year and what the path is for the 49ers to go. I could see him go in a number of directions, Croc. I could see the 49ers going trade down in the draft, collect picks. We're trying to build this thing, rebuild some foundation, add some more young, cost controllable talent, add a lot more youth and speed and healthy players to the roster. Or I could see them going the other direction and trading for veteran players and trying to spend as much money and manipulating the cap as much as possible to make this 2025 team as good as possible, whether it's Myles Garrett or any other name you want to throw out there for the 49ers this year. I could see it's probably just as likely as they go toward either one of those paths. How do you see this season for the San Francisco 49ers? And do you think this is a season where Kyle Shanahan, I don't want to say hot seat, but does the seat start to get warm for Kyle Shanahan here? How important is this season for the 49ers as a whole, including the brain trust of Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch to get it right and win games early in 2025?
Well, let's just, for me, and this is something that has come up a couple of times now, but I have a hard time understanding how the 49ers, this version of the 49ers, where they are now, are going to be better heading into this season than they've been over the previous 3 years. Just because of injuries, age, those are, to me, huge issues. And the guys that you are counting on, that's the big part of it. You are counting on Trent Williams. And I get it. Trent Williams, he wants to play till he's 40 years old. If he's playing at a very high level, but when he was, 2022, he was playing at a great level, an exceptional level. He is undoubtedly like the best tackle in the NFL. Take a step back, have some injuries, a little bit older. What will that look like? All right. Christian McCaffrey, a couple years ago, best running back in the NFL, had an amazing season. Last season, hurt, running back. Will those injuries kind of continue to pile up for him? He was clean for a year and a half or 2 years. What will it look like moving forward? Brandon Ayuk, big contract, gets hurt, torn ACL early in the season. He's coming back. Is he going to 100% be himself as soon as they step on the field, right? And the injury conversation surrounding guys that they're going to have to count on, they're going to be there. So if these guys aren't amazing like they were, how are you going to be better? So when you talk about this being a big off season, you're going to have to bring in guys that can help take some of the pressure off of the guys who have been elite, that have helped carry this roster. So from that standpoint, like, how do the 49ers do that? What kind of offseason do you have to have? How do you go about it? Is it just a draft with pick 11 and pick 43 or wherever they pick? Or is it going to be maybe some free agents, right? Some guys are going to come in and you're going to give money to them and they're going to help immediately. But I think a lot of the pressure is on that. Like, just constructing this roster, or as it's currently constructed, how do you get better at a time where it feels like the guys are leaning on, they're just getting a little bit older? So that's my first concern.
It's going to be hard to be better than the team was in 2023 from a talent perspective, from some of the star players being a little bit older, being a little bit more just ground down by what the NFL is, especially guys like Trent Williams and Christian McCaffrey. George Kittle was George Kittle last year.
Debo was deep. He was really contributing. Like, now he's not even going to be on the roster.
Right, he's not even be on the roster now. Ayuk was healthy in 2023. He, you hope that wasn't his peak as a player, because now he's going to be post knee injury, post torn ACL. So there is, Fred Warner's got the ankle. You worry about him. Dre Greenlaw was healthy all the way to the Super Bowl before his Achilles. What kind of player is he going to be if the 49ers even sign him at all? Talanoa Hufanga.
Nick Bosa was defensive player of the year. Like, that's how good he was. He was great. He was amazing. He was the best defensive player in the year in the NFL. And this past season or this upcoming season, like, are you getting that version of him? You had a lot of guys that were being considered the best player at their position, whether it's Fred Warner, Nick Bosa, Trent Williams, Christian McCaffrey. Ayuk was being considered a top 10 player at his position. Like, there were a lot of things that were like, man, we rocking and rolling. And those same guys aren't viewed to that same extent. Now, that's not saying they're not going to be good, but are they viewed to that same extent that was a team that got you to the Super Bowl? And if not, well, how do you make up that difference?
There's two ways the 49ers.
One more thing, Travarius Ward, he was an All-Pro, and he's going to be gone.
Right, and I think so. If you look at some specifics, and you could say, okay, well, look, offensive line, Trent's still going to come back. Is he most of the way? Like, is he 90%? Trent Williams, you're fine there. Dominic Pooney, you add somebody maybe in free agency, the draft, maybe the offensive line is good or better, right? McKivitz was better, I think, in 2024 than 2023. One of the few players that actually was. I mentioned George Kittle was the same old guy. Diamador Lenore, better. He's an ascending player. Renardo Green's an ascending player. Does that make up for what the younger version of Charvarius, or the younger version of Diamador Lenore plus Charvarius Ward, plus there was kind of, the shuffle at safety that year. So maybe you could look at the secondary as being, even though with no Charvarius Ward, you're still fine there. You're still good, and potentially even some higher ceiling with, maybe a draft pick and a young safety that's thrown into the mix, or, however that works out. So there's some position groups where you can say, okay, you're just as good, or you could even look at it and be like, maybe it's even better. But if you're going to be as good or better than you were in 2023, when the season when you still fell short and didn't win the Super Bowl, there's two things. One is what you add this offseason to the mix, and you still have to get that injury luck back, and you still need a full season of Williams and McCaffrey and the guys you do have. And you need Ayuk to come back and look pretty close to the same guy by October, something like that. You need a huge draft or free agency period. You have to add more talent to the team to make up for some places where you're maybe a little older, maybe a little slower, maybe you've lost some talent, maybe some guys have moved on from the team that were on the roster in 2023. So you have to supplement that. Maybe you find a star player in the draft at pick number 11. Maybe you really nail your day two, like they did last year, and you get some really big time players there. And then now you've got a way to build not only into 2025, but 2026 and 2027. But the number one way that the 49ers could be better throughout all of it is the same way any other team gets a lot better. And that's with how good your quarterback is, how good your quarterback plays. Because if you have great quarterback play, the rising tide lifts all boats, right? And the idea is, and I've seen this thrown out there, and I'm going to let you think about it just for a few seconds here as we break, Croc. Brock Purdy's only 25 years old. He just turned 25 in December. So, he'll turn 26 at the very end of the season in 2025. Brock Purdy's 25 years old. He's well before the age that most quarterbacks in the NFL peak. Quarterback is a late peaking position, 30 years old, 29, 28, 33. There, quarterbacks peak at in the early 30s of their careers and can play till 40, and we're seeing that, and at least well into their 30s and still be playing at a pretty high level. Can Brock Purdy continue to get better, and how much better can Brock Purdy get? Because he's a very different player than some of the other players maybe that we might be talking about who did peak in their early 30s. And has Brock Purdy already peaked was a big question the 49ers have to answer themselves probably before they spend this big contract on him in the 2025 offseason. I want to talk more about Jed York as well, Croc, the money he's already spent, the checks he's already written, the checks he's going to write, and if that's where some pressure might come in. And by the way, 49ers for sale right now? We'll talk about all of it coming up next. Okay, Croc. Let's go back to the Brock Purdy conversation here. You've had a second to think about it. Brock Purdy, 25 years old. How much better can Brock Purdy get? And if you nail the draft or free agency or trades or whatever it is, and you feel really good about the rest of the roster, maybe you're a step below where you were in 2023, but you feel like you're going to be a lot better than you were in 2024 with a 6-win team. 25-year-old Brock Purdy, is he already at his peak because of the style of player he is? Or can Brock Purdy continue to get a lot better? Are we going to see a Brock Purdy who doesn't peak for another 5 years potentially?
So was it Tuesday at 1:30? We're recording this show right now. And about an hour ago, I was in a meeting at lunchtime with my quarterbacks. And I used Brock Purdy as an example. I said, look, you guys don't have to be this 6'3", 6'4" guy that can, run a 4.4, 4.5. Like, you don't have to be that guy. If you understand what we're trying to do offensively, and you can look out there, identify what you're seeing from the defense, know what the weaknesses in the defense are, and then give the answer to it, that's how we can be successful. That's the recipe for the 49ers. They have Brock Purdy at quarterback. He's not the biggest guy. He doesn't have the biggest arm. But Kyle Shanahan loves him because he knows how to find the answers to the play calls that Kyle is calling for him. He understands where to go, what the weaknesses are, and he's really good at playing ahead. High school football, more times than not, you're not gonna have a great offensive line. But if my quarterback understands, right, if we call 2x2 wide cross, right, where we have a go by one, that's typically your first read. You got an out by number two. Then your guy number two on the other side, he has a deep crossing route, right? If it's cover three, well, I gotta know. Well, I don't have the go ball because the corner is going to be off and bailing into his deep third. I don't have the quick out because the nickel is going to be playing flats. So I know I can disregard all that. I got to go straight to the cross, right? Like, those are the things that Brock Purdy understands. And when you talk about if he can get better, I think we saw this year probably took a little bit of step back in moments with truly understanding, where to go with the ball, making the right decision making. I don't think Brock Purdy getting better is going to it'll maybe never look like some of the other guys. But if he's just better with his decision making, and especially in key moments, well, that's how the 49ers are going to get better. I think Brock Purdy this season, he actually played well. I don't think he was terrible. Now, was he as good as he needed to be? No, and it wasn't that he wasn't showing what he's been over the couple of years. It was, is he as good as he needs to be with this roster, with the injuries, with the emotional stuff off the field in the key moments of games? So I don't even think we're asking to have a completely different Brock Purdy. It's, can 25-year-old Brock Purdy just be better in key moments? And if he did, I think that would have been 3 or 4 wins better just this season. And I think if you have everybody back, maybe mitigating how many times you're in those situations and playing good enough ball, I think Brock Purdy for sure, or is he at his ceiling in the sense of, are we going to see like special? Maybe not. That may not be him. But can we see a really good quarterback that is good for this roster and good for this coach? I definitely think so. I think we've seen it before. I think he can definitely get back to doing that. And I don't think it has to be a totally different Brock, just different in the key moments as opposed to what we saw last season. So I definitely don't. It's kind of hard. Have we seen the best version? Have we seen the peak version of, like, maybe? But that peak version of him that we've seen is good enough if he's just better in the right moments. That was a long-winded way of saying that.
Yeah, and there are some, like, he's not perfect. He I'm sure he can get better with Kyle Shanahan, and maybe better rapport with some of his receivers, and depending on who the receivers are, how they work together. And I'm sure there's just some minor things that Brock Purdy can get better at, and a little sharper here, a little sharper there. As he grows as an NFL player, which is usually why these players get better into their 30s, because there's just so much to know. There's so much on you as a quarterback mentally. And in the NFL. And so he could probably get incrementally better at some of those things, but it's not going to be it's not like the prototype where you think about Josh Allen and where he was and why he wasn't that good when he came to the league and why he became great. Like, that's a huge gap. Like, Brock Purdy isn't that prototype, like, oh, he just needs to figure out this stuff, and then all this other talent he has is going to make him go crazy. He already had that stuff. So he kind of had a lot of the veteran ability that you expect younger quarterbacks to grow into. He kind of already had a lot of that. And that's why it was so phenomenal watching him play early on. I was like, why is this guy so good so early? But it's not like he might not have the gains that some other quarterback, some more quarterbacks in the league have, as far as
like Josh Allen. I think that was a perfect
yeah.
example. Because Allen, and for the reasons why he wasn't as good early on, now maybe it was, okay, it helps to have Diggs, come along in year 3, but he was a little sped up. And because he's sped up, not sure what he's seeing defensively, starting to play a little fast. Your mechanics start getting a little wonky. He's missing throws. He's inaccurate. Well, once he was able to hone in on those things, understand what he's seeing from defense, understanding what he's being asked. Hey, man, I'm in the same offensive system for couple years now. Oh, I added a terrific receiver who takes some of the pressure off of me. Now you can start seeing a more comfortable, better version of what he was. And then now the physical traits can start to take over, and he can truly be himself. So again, you may not see the same kind of jump from Brock Purdy, but like you said, look, coming into the league, how well he played right away, understanding just the veteran presence that he had about himself, not just on the field or during plays, but the veteran presence like in the huddle, talking to guys during practice, getting everybody locked in. Like, those are things he brought right away. So has he peaked? I think it's a different conversation for him than it would be for another guy. But just the way that he wins, and when I say wins reps, it would just look different. So has he peaked in moments that I like that? I keep going back to that because, again, last year, if you just watch games, I mean, how often do you be like, damn, Brock Purdy's terrible? Like, you don't say that in games. It's like, oh, he actually played well. More times than not, and we see this now, everybody's going to put the blame on other guys because Brock isn't playing terrible for entire games.
Yeah, there'll be the occasional throw. You're like, oh, that was weird, Brock. I don't know what that was. But he doesn't have a lot of those big moments, right? But it's also why there's not a lot of huge upside and maybe a lot of gains for him to make between age 25 and 30 that there might be for some other quarterbacks in the NFL. I said there was 2 ways the 49ers can get better, and we laid those out. There's actually another way, and I didn't even think about it, and it pertains to both sides of the football. One is Kyle Shanahan can get better as a head coach, right? And some of those late game moments, I think Kyle Shanahan could help his quarterback. So maybe together that growth could happen incrementally for Kyle, who's already one of the best offensive coordinators in the league, incrementally from Brock. You put those together. Now you hit another tier that maybe you didn't think you could get to if they're both together, just humming as play caller and quarterback as they grow together. And just Kyle's, game management, that could help the 49ers out. And then the defensive side of the ball, having Robert Saleh back, and how much difference is that going to make? A new special teams coordinator. When Brock does make the play to get the 49ers in the position to win a game, can the kicker put it through the uprights and win a football game, right? So there's some little things, and that's more improving from last year to this year, more so than talking about 2023. But there are a lot of ways the 49ers can get better incrementally. What's the big way that they can get better? Would I put my money that the 49ers will ever be as good top to bottom and as healthy as they were in 2023? I would bet against it. That's a really tough ask, but it's possible. And that's why I could see the 49ers saying, look, we could draft and we could get good, or we could go for it and we could trade for Myles Garrett and we could do this and we could do that, and we can beat the heck out of teams and worry about the rest later. And so, I've been on record with the Myles Garrett thing, and I always bring up Myles Garrett because there's other players that the 49ers could trade for, moves they could make to me, the path should be younger, cheaper, faster, build through the draft for the most part, make some shrewd moves in free agency, and really try to utilize that 11th pick to get a star player at 11, trade around, add as many picks as possible, and add as much talent as possible going forward, and build a sustainable foundation for your football team going forward. That's what my plan would be. But I've said this about Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett is the type of player you change your plans for. So for me, the Myles Garrett thing takes care of itself. If you can get Myles Garrett, you do it, and then you figure out the rest. If not, that's the path. It's building, through the draft, and you got to get cheaper. You got a lot of expensive players on this football team, and some of them should be around for a long time, including Brock Purdy with what he makes. And so you got to be smart with your money and resources. But then again, if a player that is a Hall of Famer in his 20s still, like Myles Garrett, and I bring up the example of the 1990s, man, the kind of the pre-salary cap madness of, how impactful was it when Deion went from the Falcons to the 49ers, then from the 49ers to the Cowboys? How much better were those teams when they added Deion Sanders? How much better were the Green Bay Packers when they added a Hall of Fame defensive lineman in Reggie White? And Reggie White was 32 by the time he went to the Packers, and he was that was insane. That was a seismic shift in the NFL. That's the kind of impact Myles Garrett can make on the 49ers defense. So if you can make that move, then you do it, and you change your plans for that. I'm not advocating changing your plans and throwing a bunch of cash around and trading a bunch of draft picks for a lot of other players in the league. But Myles Garrett, you change your plans for that impactful of a player. And man, how fun would that be on defense? And how many ills would it help on defense that might be some holes in some other places? How much better would those players be playing behind Myles Garrett on one side and Nick Bosa on the other side? And I don't care. Give me a second round pick, a defensive tackle. I don't care.
I would do it. I do like that you touched on Kyle Shanahan, because when you're looking at what's going on around the NFL, especially NFC, with coaches and kind of some of the movement and whatnot, and what coaches are on the hot seat and what coaches aren't, it's almost like Kyle Shanahan gets a pass for everything because he is a good coach, or at the very least, a good offensive-minded coach. But why I think Kyle, and this is not me trying to be a, what do you call it, like a hot takey guy or anything like that. I think anybody that watches this show, they know we're not hot take guys. But I do think Kyle should be under some pressure, because it's been very boomer bust throughout his tenure. And Nick Sirianni, a guy who just hoisted the Lombardi and won a trophy, some 49ers are trying to do. He's been to as many Super Bowls as the 49ers. He's a different style of a coach. He's more the CEO as opposed to, a coordinator. But he was on the hot seat after going to a Super Bowl and losing. And they're not having the lows like the 49ers. Now, part of it was, you talked about health that the 49ers had in 2023. The Eagles had that health this past season. I think I saw something from their medical staff holding up 21 out of 22 starters on the offensive defense that started off the season, started like in the Super Bowl. So that is amazing. And you have that, and that can definitely help you win a Super Bowl. But Kyle, there's something there. And I wonder if he potentially has too much on his plate, and he's so into this is how I do things that he doesn't want to delegate certain things. I know as a head coach, there's certain things I feel like he should be delegating now. And he's just like, I'm just not going to do it. I think that's going to be the biggest difference between the 49ers eventually winning this all and maybe not.
How hot should Kyle Shanahan's seat be in 2025? And why are the 49ers trying to sell off a portion of the team? Next. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel. And with FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip, you can bet on that fourth quarter comeback. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay, which are super fun. Give me all the parlays. I love the parlay, the regular parlays, the same game parlays, always a lot of fun. And you know what else is a lot of fun on FanDuel is those NFL draft props. More and more NFL draft props all the time at FanDuel. And of course, you can bet on 2025 NFL season-long bets and futures already right now. So even though the NFL season is over, still a ton of ways to bet on the NFL. NBA getting hot and heavy. Baseball's coming. College tournament. So right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So this is interesting with ownership and money and the tie-in here. And I want to go to a report from Tim Kawakami. And this kind of slipped through, and it's been talked about a little bit. We haven't talked about it a lot. But last week, Tim Kawakami said, quote, I know that there's still frustration about the way Brandon Ayuk handled his bitter negotiations last summer, and that members of the front office were never thrilled about giving him $30 million per year on the eve of the regular season. And a team that absolutely hates setting contract precedents probably doesn't feel great in retrospect for buckling and giving Nick Bosa $34 million per year and $120 million guaranteed. I think he had 88 fully guaranteed with 120 other guarantees, which is still stands as the highest salary and most guaranteed money in the league among defensive players. And that was 2 Septembers ago after his long holdout. And that's from Kawakami from the SF Standard. And so it's an interesting quote from Kawakami, because the second part of it is kind of him saying they probably don't. So that's kind of Tim Kawakami's editorial of, you know what, for a team that hates setting contract precedents, they probably didn't feel great about giving Nick Bosa as much money as they give and kind of buckling under the pressure of the Nick Bosa holdout and giving him all that money. But that wasn't a report from the front office. That was kind of Tim Kawakami saying that a little bit more.
Was it though? You don't think he's hearing?
Well, that's what I'm saying is like, he might have heard a little bit, but the first part was like, he says, members of the front office were never thrilled about giving him $30 million per year and talked about how there's still frustration. So the first part of it is like, somebody in the front office told me that they don't like the way Brandon Ayuk handled his negotiations, and they never wanted to give him the $30 million per year to begin with anyway. And then the other part of it sounds like maybe he heard something, or maybe he's just like, yeah, you know what? They probably didn't like this that much either because they don't like setting contract precedents. But the first part, that's straight up like someone, and I don't think it's John Lynch necessarily. It's probably somebody else in the organization. Is it Jed York? Is it Parag? Is it somebody that is right under those guys? Is it, so who front office has a lot of people in it. But
real quick, I think Ayuk got paid accordingly. They just didn't want to do it. And if you didn't, then you shouldn't have did it. But he got $4 or $5 million less per year than the elite guys. I think it was like right on par. And when he had an opportunity to test the market, there were teams willing to pay that amount to him.
Right. Yes. That was, and obviously
they didn't feel comfortable with it. Okay, don't do it. I thought they wouldn't have been comfortable with it because they don't plan on using him that way. And that was my only reason. But it's like, well, we don't feel comfortable because we just don't want to pay. Like, we don't want to set that precedent. Like, he would have, okay, if you let him go, he gets paid that.
Right. But he was still under contract. And that's kind of part of it. Is like, that's one of my frustrations as well when I'm looking at teams around the league and I see how the negotiations go. Nobody hits free agency. Everyone kind of just bids against themselves. And it's like, you're under contract, so play. And it never gets to that. It's always like, how much do you want? That's what this guy got the most of. Okay, well, here you go. And it's like, it's like, what are you asking? It's like it's like me with my son. He's like, I want some candy. I'm like, I don't know. You haven't had dinner yet, Leo. And he's like, well, I really want some candy. And I was like, all right, here's some candy. Be quiet. It's not like, nope, I said no candy. You're getting no candy. Teams don't do that anymore. Maybe dads don't do that enough anymore.
Yeah, maybe they're getting soft on the players like we're getting soft on our kids.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that's what's going on right now. But the IU contract was right in line. But here's the thing is like, if they really feel that way, and who knows, maybe Kyle and John feel completely different than whoever Kawakami's source was too, which is possible. I mean, a lot of people.
The frustration may not be Kyle and John. It could just be someone else.
Yeah, it could be someone else. And here's the thing: if that someone else is Jed York, who's signing the paychecks, It's a pretty important figure also, right? And so that's probably where the pressure comes from to me for Kyle Shanahan and for the 49ers. If we were to talk about a Kyle Shanahan hot seat, you can't go win 6 games again next year. And you certainly can't go win 6 games when you've got one of the highest paid wide receivers in the league, the highest paid defensive player in the league, and soon to be one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the league. And you still go out there and win 6 games. That's something that probably can't happen. And if you're Jed York and you are the guy that's writing the checks, and like, well, why do I have all this high priced talent and we're not, let alone winning Super Bowls, right? We're picking 11th in the draft. It shouldn't drop that low, even with the injuries the 49ers have had. And that's where I start to question, like, what's going on here? How did the 49ers win 6 games? Because even the injured, broken down 49ers team wasn't that bad. You still had some really good players. You had the 14th ranked offensive line in the league. No matter how many games Trent Williams played, you were still middle of the road offensive line. You were still able to run the ball 5 yards per carry without Christian McCaffrey. You still had Fred Warner. You still had Nick Bosa. You still had Diamador Lenore. You still had Deebo Samuel. You still had the best tight end in the league, George Kittle, right? And so that's still better than a lot of teams. There are teams that finished with a better record than the 49ers that didn't have the talent that the broken, injured 49ers had. And so that's where
that was my thing with the, like, and it wasn't like, hey, you gotta win a Super Bowl with this broken roster.
Right.
It's like, you can't win more than 6 games. The same amount that you won in 2017 with Jimmy Garoppolo playing the last few games. You couldn't win more than 6 games with the same amount as the 2020 roster that was broken down and lost. Like, that was my biggest issue. Like, you have to figure out a way to win more than 6 games, even with this roster, because it's still better, especially if you're better at the quarterback position, than those 2020 and 2017 teams.
Yeah, that's where the heat. If I'm Jed York and I'm trying to get in his mind, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. He's writing checks for this, and the Brock Purdy guaranteed money is going to be double the Bosa guaranteed money. The Bosa money was the most money that the franchise has ever given up. Brock Purdy's annual salary and his guarantees are going to be almost double. That's like a $200 million check that Jed York is going to have to write for that quarterback. And you would think that
real quick, what they got to know is, though, the escrow part of it, right? And this happened with I think then they were still the Oakland Raiders or the Las Vegas Raiders, but they lost Khalil Mack. It wasn't because they didn't want to give him a contract. The owner could not pay him the guaranteed money. And I mean, you can maybe explain it better than I can, but whatever the guaranteed amount is, the team has to have that amount available to go into escrow. And the Raiders did not have that for Mack.
Yeah, so the fully guaranteed money, the way I understand it, the fully guaranteed money for a contract, you can't just be like, this money's guaranteed. To guarantee it means to put it in escrow, so it's in an account, so that when, if something were to happen and your organization was to fail or whatever, this guaranteed money is there for that player because that money is guaranteed. And so Jed York has to write a massive check, and even though you might not give it to him all at once, the guaranteed money does have to go into escrow. And so those are big checks you have to write. Now, I don't know if that's related to the 49ers selling part of the team. I do think it's a little bit of a kind of a cash machine for NFL owners. And so you mentioned the Raiders that we're having a hard time coming up with that much liquid cash to be able to pay guys. They're Jeffrey Lurie, the Philadelphia Eagles. They have done a lot of big contracts. They're kind of a similar team right now to the 49ers as far as what their payroll looks like. Jeffrey Lurie put the Eagles on the block and sold 8% of it or whatever it was. And here's what's interesting. And I don't know how related it is to the way the organization is run, how much liquid cash they need to operate it, if there's anything to it and if it's related or just not related at all. One thing that's pretty clear, though, is these NFL teams is that the valuations of these franchises is so huge, but a lot of it is just like, okay, the franchise is worth this much, but you don't have the $1 billion in cash to go buy a yacht or go on vacation or go buy a vacation home, whatever it is that the rich and famous do, whatever it would be that a billionaire owner would do with the money.
Same with the house.
What's that?
Like your house may be worth to $1 million.
Yeah.
It's like but I don't have $1 million cash.
Right, exactly. So I think part of this is owners are going to start treating their franchises as a cash machine, because NFL owners voted in August to expand last August 2024 to expand the league's rules to allow private equity firms to buy a limited amount of stake in teams. And so a private equity firm is not like a family-owned business. It's like and they're not going to operate the team owning 10% of a team. But what it does do is gives current ownership $900 million in cash to do with whatever they need to do for their family. And, the DeBartolo Yorks, it's a big family. It's not just Jed. There's mom and dad. A lot of people might benefit from just some cash too. So I don't know if it's related as much to the product on the field or anything, but the NFL is becoming just such a huge, massive, big money thing. I don't like private equity and corporate interests being more and more involved with owning the teams, though. I feel like that's not a great precedent, and it's not a great place to be for the league, but there's just not that many other ways that a team could even sell a part of the team if they don't start looking for money like that. But anytime it gets further away from like human interaction, face to face, when it starts to be just this corporate entity, they start to care a lot more about just the dollars of it, rather than if it was a family-owned team that cares about the fans, cares about the tradition, cares about the winning. So the further you get away from that, does start to make me a little bit uneasy. But that's a conversation I think for another day, Croc.
But you talked about the importance of just winning, right? With so much money tied in, and a tough thing for Jet York. Hey, how sure are you on this Brock Purdy kid? Right now, like Kyle's like, yeah, I'm all on. Yeah, it's easy when you're paying them $900,000 a year.
Yeah.
But when I have to put $200 million in escrow for this guy, and from what it seems like to me, and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like a lot of Brock Purdy's success is dependent on Kyle, the offense, putting him in certain positions. How much is Brock valued outside of the 49ers organization? So you can't even just say, oh man, you had a losing season. All right, fire Kyle Shanahan. It was like, well, the quarterback works best with Kyle. And I don't know what that's going to look like with someone else. But now I got $200 million and I had to sell part of my company to fund signing this guy. That's enough to make you hate somebody. Like,
yeah, that's when rifts can begin. And again, that's sort of one of the questions. You used to look at the 49ers a little side eye. And I go, well, Kyle Shanahan wasn't injured this year. Brock Purdy, very end of the year, got banged up, right? But coaching quarterback you're not supposed to dip like that when you have the coaching quarterback combination set that the 49ers have with Kyle Shanahan and Brock Purdy. So that's where you're like, okay. And you better be right about Brock if you're going to pay him elite money, because you'll be on the hook for that for a long time.
Yeah, it's not just the money conversation. I think that, and I like that you kind of phrased it this way. I think a lot of people, oh, well, Trevor Lawrence is getting this much and Jordan Love and all these other guys. And it's like, well, yeah, good for them. But what if I'm the owner? Good for them. What does that have to do with me, my team, my money? And what happens if this doesn't work out to me? What position does that put me in? If I got to sell part of my organization to fund this player, that would make me, Kyle, you better be right, or we're all going to be hurting after this.
Yeah, it is interesting. I wonder how much that plays into it with the selling of the team and then the current finances of the current players, or they're rumored to be buying maybe another soccer team, Glasgow team. Are they just using the organization as a cash machine too, now that they can sell to private equity firms and just taking some money out of it and getting a whole bunch of cash for the York DeBartolo family as well? I don't know. Interesting days to come. No doubt an important, pressure-filled offseason for the 49ers in 2025, and we've got it covered for you every single day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and anywhere you listen to your podcast. Croc and I back tomorrow right here, Locked On 49ers.